reality tends to be disappointing. This is Libertarian View, your source of decentralized and distributed information. Nowadays, it is quite common for socialists to defend the implementation of their ideas via the so-called democratic socialism. A good example of that is Bernie Sanders, the American Democrat. Those people tend to admit that the Soviet Union was in fact an abominable totalitarian dictatorship. However, even if this idea of socialism without a dictatorship seems like an innovation, it has been put to the test before in the Soviet Union. Yes, that Soviet Union was a democracy. First things first, during the civil war that broke out with the October Revolution in 1917, Lenin tried to establish the democratic socialism conceding power to the Soviets, which is the Russian term for popular councils, to represent the working class. However, in 1918, most Soviets did not have Bolsheviks as leaders. Quick history lesson: the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party was divided into two main factions, the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks. The Mensheviks defended a gradual switch to socialism, while the Bolsheviks stood for a revolution as a means to reach socialism. Since most elected Soviet leaders were not Bolsheviks, the revolution was threatened. Lenin closed every municipal Soviet under the control of the Red Army. With this historical context, let's proceed to the democratic features of that emerging nation. As the Red Army guaranteed territory and secured victory in the Civil War, Lenin established a regime in which the voting was secret, indirect, and distrital, inheriting the mechanism of the previously established Soviets. This way, there were Soviets and villages who elected representatives to the municipal Soviet. Those local Soviets elected representatives to the regional Soviet, and those on the regional level elected representatives to the provincial Soviet, which elected representatives to the Constituent Republic Soviet, which would finally elect representatives to the Supreme Soviet. Anyone could climb the ranks and reach the highest level, and if a Soviet thought that its representative was not doing a very good job, it could impeach him and select someone instead. In theory, the Soviets had autonomy over their jurisdictions. They could use government resources as they wished, and could even govern themselves. The only demand was to not conflict with the interests of the nation. The problem was that the Supreme Soviet gatherings would rarely take place, and in this case, the one in charge was the General Secretary to the party. You can pretty much guess what comes next. The interests of the nation were the interests of the General Secretary. But, besides that, there was democracy, right? Well, somewhat of a democracy, I would say. There were cases in which the elector asking about the eligible candidates would receive an answer of a single name. Yes, there was only one person to vote. That happened because the ones allowed to run for the representative spot were decided by the Central Committee of the party. So, the elector could only decide if he was in favor or against that chosen candidate in particular. However, there was a cap in the number of candidates who were allowed to participate in the elections for the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. A lot of people tried to run as independent candidates without any party, but it did not mean that they were not aligned with the big party. In 1936, a man known for his mustache was set to implement the most democratic constitution one can imagine, broadly securing the most basic human needs. Emil Ludwig, a journalist born in Poland, interviewed Joseph Stalin and wrote a biography about him, attaching the 1936 Soviet constitution in the book. To give an example of those laws, you can read the following lines there. Quote, Article 125. According to the interests of the workers, and to reinforce the socialist system, the law guarantees to every citizen freedom of speech, press freedom, freedom to do reunions and assemblies, freedom to do marches and demonstrations. Close quote. Those freedoms were secured by the amenities conceded by the government to the people, including public buildings, streets, mass transports, etc. Everything to exercise those rights. Furthermore, This constitution guaranteed to the citizens the right to private property associated to their work productivity. The right to inherit properties was also written there. But back to this video's theme. Chapter 11 talks about the new electoral system, and Article 134 established universal suffrage. Article 141 said that the candidates are nominated by proletarian organizations, such as syndicates and work unions. And Article 142 establishes that any candidate can be deprived via majority decision. While back in the days the socialists praised this glorious constitution and the superiority of a socialist world compared to the excluding capitalism, their critics alleged that the direct voting system for every office did not affect the party leaders. Not only that, but shortly after the implementation of this constitution, the purges started, where peasants and officers of the Red Army were persecuted. This act broke every article of the Constitution's Chapter 10, and even after that, Stalin stayed in power for more than 17 years. The Constitution gave citizens some rights, but a piece of paper can't handle an AK-47. Because of that, it is said that this constitution did not concede any rights, but served only as propaganda to Stalin. No wonder one of his most famous quotes is, "The elector does not matter. What really matters is who's counting the votes." Close quote. In 1938, the Supreme Soviet was instituted, being the highest instance of the legislative power in the Soviet Union. Yet, Stalin still stood strong. It was divided into the Soviet Union with one deputy for every 3,000 citizens and 791 more, all elected via universal suffrage, and the Nationality Soviet with 625 to 750 deputies, representing the federated republics, autonomous republics, national districts, and autonomous regions. The Supreme Soviet was elected via direct elections with universal suffrage, just like the Constitution ordered. But their candidates were only those who were well consolidated in the political scene. It is worth mentioning here that the judiciary power composed by the People's Tribunal and the Supreme Tribunal were not in charge of deciding if a person is guilty or not, but instead to instruct the population via the judgment of the defendants, presenting their crimes and the proof of the respective evidence. The lawyers were forced to make their clients plead guilty. The 1936 Constitution in its Article 111 established that the defendant had the right to defend themselves, but the trials of Stalin's opponents through the purge told a different story. With Stalin's death, the Soviet politics lost its personalist feature, and the power was exercised in fact by the Supreme Soviet, or the Politburo. However, the KGB, famous Soviet intelligence agency, was incorporated into the party, and its operations were intensified with a wide network of informants being spread all over the Soviet Union. All of the members of the Supreme Soviet already had a good record and were well known in the party. Those politicians elected a leader to govern the whole Union, but there was a moment when the president of the Supreme Soviet was also the General Secretary of the Communist Party. Shortly over, both offices merged into one, creating the President of the Soviet Union. The political structure of the USSR was rigid, and people in higher places influenced directly or indirectly the inferior stances. The elections were allegedly indisputable for representing the popular will. The 1989 elections were the last ones in the Soviet Union, whose power diminished after the fall of the Berlin Wall. On December 25, 1991, Gorbachev, during a ceremony broadcasted worldwide, announced the end of the USSR and resigned. With that comes to an end the state, which, on paper, was the very best of what humanity could create. A nation where there was no work exploitation and where people did not do their parts thinking about getting something back, but instead thinking about the greater good. But it was actually a state marked by authoritarianism, by oppression and tragedies, by brainwashing and indoctrination, by intrigue and persecution. Some states try to follow the USSR legacy. Vietnam, for instance, has a similar political system. Cuba was also inspired by the 1936 Soviet Constitution, which was instituted during the Cuban Revolution. All those regimes adopt democratic characteristics and make people believe that democracy and popular backing are unquestionable. They assume that if most of the population voted, so they have the legitimacy to do whatever they want. It doesn't matter how vile those acts are. The population is made to believe that participating in this political system is something good and rightful, and are prevented from realizing that the illegitimacy lies within the state's power and not in a government without popular approval. That happens because popular approval can be manipulated, whether it is by electoral fraud, like Stalin said, or by psychological manipulation. A state is still illegitimate for denying freedom, the foremost right, to its citizens. Even if the representatives are elected by the people, and even if they say that they will respect you, writing a wonderful constitution and promising that they will do as they say, in the end, they are the ones who have the power. They control the currency and the guns, and you, a mere individual, will obey. Because if you don't, you know what to expect. Thank you for your audience. This article was suggested and written by Martin Blank, translated by Paulo Almeida, revised and narrated by Arthur Silvani. If you like this video, please hit the thumbs up icon below and share the video in your social network. If you want to be notified of other videos, hit subscribe and then the bell icon. See you soon!